So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on and look at some of those relationships and how that actually can affect us in certain areas, regulations, for example. And I'm delighted to be joined on the stage by Daniel Elwell, who is currently the FAA's acting administrator, the former Air Force Lieutenant General and former commercial airline pilot for American Airlines, took over in January. He was previously a Senior Vice President for Safety, Security and Operations with Airlines for America, the A4A organization, which is the leading trade group representing most of the nation's major airlines. So very, very familiar, I think, with a lot of the organizations that we'll see around here. So Daniel, welcome to join us. Please welcome Daniel. Now, if I could remind you to put your headphones on, you'll find it a lot easier now, and we've got some headphones here, so when we get on to some question and answers, then we'll need to be able to hear you speaking as well then. So Daniel, welcome. Why is it that Brexit is important to the FAA?
Well, Brexit is important to the FAA and the US as it is with any country who does, the speakers are off, I guess, huh? Yeah. It's important to the US as it is with every country that does business with the EU and the UK. But our business is a business of safety, the business of aviation, commonality. Aviation is an international endeavor. And so we have to make sure that all of our activities between the US, the UK, EU is safe, efficient, seamless. And look, face it, Brexit is, I don't need to tell anybody in this audience, Brexit is disruptive. It has the potential to be disruptive by March 2019 if we don't see a path, particularly as Ms. Morgan said, particularly with regard to the regulated industries, which of course the aviation is. So that's why we're talking about it. We need some clarity, and I loved her metaphor about an airplane on a trip and having an idea where it's going to land. We need an idea of where this is going to land sooner rather than later.
Now, I think there's been sort of an observation from outside that there's been a lot of chit-chat going on in Parliament while everybody else is standing around being frustrated of what's going on. Mm-hmm. But behind the scenes, are you talking with the UK CAA and EASA, for example, about post-Brexit? And is that post-Brexit, hard Brexit, post-Brexit, soft Brexit? Do we have options in place, and are you talking to them?
So again, that's the whole point. The lack of clarity means that we have to pursue all possibilities. And of course, we have to start that now. We have to start developing, okay, what are the regulations we have to have in place if there's no deal, right? What are the practices, what are the regulations that we have to adapt or amend if, for instance, as was suggested in the white paper, there's an associated membership in EASA. It takes a tremendous amount of our resources, and Patrick Keyes and the UK CAA, tremendous amount of resources to figure out all of the ramifications, all the possible paths. What we'd prefer is to have, again, clarity. This is what's going to happen in March 2019. And that way, we don't have to spend as much time, resources, and energy. We can focus on exactly what's going to happen. It's not knowing. It's the not knowing that has been, it continues to be disruptive.
So what are you doing to mitigate the disruptive effects?
So we're looking at, okay, what happens if there's no deal? What happens if UK is not part of EASA at all? What do we have to do? We have to have a certification safety arrangement with the UK, separate from EASA. Well, we better look at that, the aviation safety agreement we had once upon a time with UK, and maybe adapt that, make it up to today's standards. Or if it's an associated membership, what does associated membership mean? Look at Article 66 and what Switzerland's doing, and maybe have something. But again, I can't reiterate this enough. It's very problematic to have to chase those two radically different approaches. And then if we come up to March 19th and there isn't a deal, or there is, which one do we use? So.
And one thing that worries me with that is if we're talking about the March next year, what happens on April the 1st? Because we know the wheels of governments move incredibly slowly. If it's like Nikki says, you're going to get to late night negotiations, it's all going to break down, and eventually on the last date there is a deal of some kind. If it's the deal that actually sees us a bit harder, how do we get those pre-1975 agreements or whatever they were, if we know it takes so long to get things through regulatory bodies?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that the comment about she fully expects it to be on the 11th hour and after all-night negotiations and people saying there will be no deal. I kind of hope that doesn't happen. I hope that real soon, and maybe even in next week's negotiations, they will come away with a decision on how to go forward on these highly regulated areas. What happens on April 1st, whatever happens on April 1st, will be safe. I mean, I've known Patrick Key many, many years, and I know he's focused on the same thing. No matter what happens in the political sphere, aviation is going to be safe, and aviation is going to be safe between the countries. We'll have and we'll be ready to do whatever direction April 1st puts us in. Again, it just would be immeasurably more helpful if we knew which path to take.
So there are contingency plans
Absolutely.
In place.
Absolutely.
You're already up with that. Do you get the feeling then that aviation, aerospace is actually a special case? That we are outside the normal political things. No matter what happens, we have to remain safe. No matter what happens, we have to be able to take off from Heathrow and fly to New York the next day. Or do we stop buying tickets?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's sort of, a friend of mine said recently, it's sort of like Y2K. I mean, we know it's coming, it's going to happen, and no matter what happens on January 1st or January 2nd, we have to still continue to use the grid. We still have to turn on computers. We still have to, it has to work. Yeah. So It will.
I just want to see if we've got questions from the audience while we're on the Brexit part, because then there's a few other things I'd like to ask you about the FAA and where we're going with regulation. Is there any observations or questions? Down here, please. Oh, we need our headphones on.
Oh.
Just straight on the ear. That's it. Okay.
Hi, Saim Said from Politico. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is if you could go into a bit more detail about what no-deal preparations for the FAA entail. So what exactly, what sort of measures have you put in place in the eventuality of a no-deal Brexit in the US?
Well, currently the UK is part of EASA. The UK is part of EASA. There's nothing in place. There's contingency planning, of course. We would be foolish not to be engaged in contingency planning. So what our people are doing on all sides is examining, if there was no deal, what needs to be in place that isn't currently. We identify that, and then we begin to figure out what work needs to be done to put those things in place. Now, we have a 1995 agreement with UK, a bilateral aviation safety agreement, which would, my understanding is it's technically still in place, but of course it's been subsumed by the BASA that we have with EASA. But what we would need to do, if to the worst, what some are calling the worst case scenario, no deal, then what we would have to do is we would have to reestablish a bilateral with UK and take that forward.
And that could take years.
That could take years.
Any more questions for now? No? Good. Okay, I'm going to come off of Brexit. So I'll take my headphones off again now. We're seeing here real increased interest in drones and in commercial space operations. Just tell us, how is the FAA working to integrate these new technologies?
We are taking a very careful, iterative approach. We work within the crucible of having the best safety record in history. And what we're looking at is technologies that do not fit the mold of the current legacy airspace activity. Unmanned aircraft is sort of sits the whole concept of see and avoid on its ear. So what we're doing is we wrote and published the first regulation to integrate drones in the airspace in Part 107. And what Part 107 does, it takes small drones and tells drone operators how they can fly small drones in the airspace safely. That's below 500 feet, below 400 feet, it's small drones, but it's starting the iterative process. From there, we now have an integration pilot program. 10 municipalities across the US have partnered with industry and have presented operational scenarios in various geographical areas within the country. That's going to start at the end of the summer. It's a 3-year program. We're going to gather a tremendous amount of data, and we're going to look at how UAS integrate into the airspace safely so that we can let this industry bloom. Now, the things that we currently don't allow, that this pilot project will help us collect data to start writing regulations to allow our flights over people. We currently don't allow that unless there's a waiver granted. Beyond visual line of sight, allowing operators to run to control drones beyond what they can see, and at night. These are 3 areas that we think we can get done, but we need data and we need to see how it works in practice.
But isn't that one of the sort of great challenges? Kind of how do you balance the need to keep pace with industry, while at the same time maintaining your need to have the safety of the system?
Yeah. Well, it is a challenge to ensure that we keep the system as safe as it is today, which is a very, very high bar, but we don't want to stifle innovation. And this is important because in many respects, it's the very innovation that is allowing a safer system. So we wouldn't want to stifle that which will make us safer. But we also have to make sure that what we're bringing into the system does not have unintended consequences. And for some people, the FAA appears to work very slowly, but it's because we have to examine, collect the data, and analyze every possible consequence of what we put in the system. Because every time we put something new in our NAS, the National Airspace System, every time we put in something new, it brings change. And change to an environment like the National Airspace System, you have to make very, very carefully.
But isn't there a danger that by the time you've actually got the data to prove that it works, it's actually moved on, and you've got to start all over again? So we never actually get to integrate the new technologies into aviation because we're still waiting for the regulator to approve it.
So the drone activity has been a great sort of laboratory for that dynamic, right? So, for decades we have been modernizing the airspace system with legacy aerospace manufacturers, airlines, people and companies that know aviation, they know the safety regimen that we have to go through. So, for instance, it takes Airbus and Boeing 5, 10, 15 years to create and put into the system a brand new generation of aircraft. It takes the drone world that we're now working with, who are not aviation experts, who are coming into this fresh and new. They're coming from Silicon Valley and from the IT sphere that has changeover in technology in months. The aviation community doesn't change in months. And so, while yes, in some technological spheres you will see a generation or two pass before we're able to integrate the earlier one, it is a consequence of how safe we are and what we have to do to ensure that safety. And I can't say we are making every effort to move at the pace of innovation, to move at the pace of technology. But in some cases, with what we're dealing with, which is in the US, 5,000 flights a day, we're close to moving 1 billion passengers a day through our NAS. When you're talking about that kind of scale, you cannot make wholesale changes in as quickly as I know that tech companies would like to see us do it.
In terms of the airspace, how do you see then the use of AI and things like that in controlling our airspace as well? I mean, are you comfortable that we're going to see these technologies coming through and perhaps losing people in the process, but relying on technology more?
Yeah. So, let me see if I got your question right. Perhaps losing people in the process. We've had in the U.S. one commercial fatality in the past 9.5 years. We're so far past the idea that we would be willing to lose some people or have some accidents for the march of progress. Aviation left that paradigm decades ago. So no, we have to be sure that especially as it relates to what we call Part 121, to commercial travel, we do have, when it comes to carrying passengers in 121 carriage, the margin of safety is too small to sort of experiment, right? That's not to say we don't have a lot of research going on, and we do in protected scenarios. We have 6 or 7 drone test sites around the country in the U.S. that are doing all the things that we need to get the data on to put them into the system. But I personally, as a pilot, I have no problem with autonomous travel, autonomous aviation, autonomous surface too. And I'm not nervous about AI. I think AI is coming already into the aviation space, but we have to be sure that as I said before, whatever we bring into the system we have to be sure that it's not bringing unintended consequences, because we're that safe.
Okay, we have a panel coming on here in about 20 minutes or something, talking about urban air taxis. Now, it's a very, very different market and a different approach to everything we know about, going from hub point A, hub point B, and so on, up, down, and round, not even going that high. Are you going to get on one, and do you think the FAA is going to approve urban air taxis?
I'd absolutely get on one, and I think we are going to see them in the skies over our urban and suburban areas. I wouldn't have said this, quite frankly, 5 or 10 years ago. I wouldn't have said that I think we're going to see it in my lifetime, but I think we are. And I think, again, it's because the ingenuity of the industry in collaboration with the regulator, it's been a very good partnership. It was rough at first when these new change agents came in, bringing in these companies that had not been involved in aviation. But now I think the dialogue, we have a group in the U.S. called the Drone Advisory Committee, and it's populated with industry leaders across the drone space, and we meet quarterly and talk about where we are, where we need to be, and how we're going to get there. And we're all on the same page. In fact, one of the applications for the drone integration pilot program, one of the 10 spots, hopes to, in their 3-year span, hope to have autonomous taxi demonstrations. And it will likely start, let's say a 4-passenger vehicle will likely start with a monitor, right? So more a monitor than a pilot when it finally starts. And it'll be in a very controlled scenario, but no, I think it'll happen.
Any questions while we're talking about drones and taxis? Now I want to take you on to just one other area then. And we'll be talking about this on tomorrow, Wednesday. Supersonics. A lot more of those happening. A lot of people in the UK, I think, would probably blame the Americans for the demise of Concorde in a way that we could never ever fly to the places we should have done. Do you think we're going to see supersonic air transport, or do you think it's a dream?
I think we're going to see supersonic transport again, only if, as is always the case in these things, only if enough of private industry see the strong business case for it. I think the demise of the Concorde was as much economics as it was anything else. And we also have to get past and make continents comfortable with the noise, the noise aspect of it. I mean, currently we don't allow supersonic flight over landmass, and neither does Europe. So hopefully the technology has reached a point where the effects of the sonic boom have been mitigated. We also have to all of us have to deal with, achieve a technological level where the power plant that gets that supersonic aircraft up at altitude can do so at today's noise levels, local noise levels, which, since the Concorde was allowed to fly, have gotten much, much stricter. We're up stage 5 now. So it's going to be a challenge, but if anybody can do it, the aerospace industry can do it. And if they figure it out and there's a business case for it, I think we're going to see supersonic, maybe even hypersonic travel.
Okay. Your career was as a pilot. Would you tell any young kid coming through school now that she or he ought to look at flying, being a pilot as a career?
I would say, look, I would encourage any young person to get their private pilot's license, at least that. But I'd also encourage young people just to get into the aviation, get bit by the aviation bug. It could be as a mechanic, it could be as an engineer, it could be as a controller. But we're in desperate need globally of exciting the next generation about aviation as we know it. And of course it's changing. Technology is changing so fast, and we're probably going to need a lot of that generation to come into the drone space and do what needs to be done there. But I think broadly speaking, we have a shortage in engineers, we have a shortage in mechanics, we have a shortage in pilots. So we need to find ways, and we in the U.S. actually are being very proactive about that. In fact, we're going to have a summit on the issue of exciting people into our industry in the very near future.
Okay, and finally, I just want to pick up on diversity, really. FAA is a big organisation. We talked about air traffic controllers. We talk about pilots. When do you see us being able to 50% women doing this business as they should be? Yeah,
that's a tough one. And I don't know if it's just cultural and it's just like sort of a hangover from a bygone era, but women in particularly are underrepresented in aviation. And I know from personal experience, women are every bit as good at the controls of an airplane as men. So I personally am passionate about what I view as a big pilot shortage looming in the future. And I think one way, and a very important way to go after that, is to find ways, not just young people, but women, all races. It's got to be a global interest to get people into flying. There's several women in aviation organizations around the world, and they have great ideas about how to get women more interested in aviation. And I support all of those efforts.
Brilliant. And in the absence of any questions?
I was just looking for the left and right, yeah.
Hi, me again, Saim Said from Politico. I had a question about the supersonic jets. I mean, you mentioned one of the concerns being the noise, but another concern is that in terms of the amount of fuel that it would consume would be much higher than normal planes, and given a drive towards more fuel efficiency globally, I was wondering whether that also presents a separate sort of challenge to getting supersonic jets in the air, or that's less of a concern.
Obviously, the environment and CO2 emissions is a concern globally. But as I said before, that's part of the conundrum of supersonic flight that I think industry is well equipped to deal with. And every aircraft, every new generation of aircraft and engine is on an order of 15% more fuel efficient than the one before. Aviation has never been cleaner than it is today, and I expect that to continue, even with the supersonic product.
Any other questions? No? In which case, Daniel, can I say thank you very, very much for joining us on this stage today?
You're welcome.
Marvellous to have you here, and
Pleasure.
thank you.